Hi, welcome to Retiring Well. Folks, we got a great show for you today. We're going to talk about indices or indexes, those benchmarks you want to follow. Emotional attachment to stocks, why that can maybe sometimes be a bad thing. Surviving spouse taxation, what does that look like? Expense ratios, as they have to do with mutual funds, and what is the Federal Reserve? We hear so much about them. What is their role? So stay tuned.
Retiring Well, brought to you by Centennial Wealth Advisory, financial advisors specializing in retirement planning and serving all of northern Michigan. Retiring Well, helping you plan for a successful and comfortable retirement. Retiring Well, plan to retire well.
Hi, listen, in this segment, I want to talk to you about indices, or what we call indexes. These are indexes that we track when we're trying to see, what the market is doing. Now, the one we most common is the S&P 500. Now, this is just simply the largest 500 companies in the U.S., okay? It actually has 505 stocks in it because 5 of them have 2-class shares that it follows, but for the most part, 500 companies. It's a weighted index, meaning those stocks that have greater value have a greater weighing in the index. So if you've got a portfolio of large company stocks, that's probably a good benchmark you're going to want to follow. There's also another index called the Dow Jones Industrial Average. Now, this is just 30 large company stocks. They're picked by a committee. It's not a weighted index like the S&P 500. And it's not necessarily all industrial stocks. That's what it might have been in the past. That's no longer reflective of that index. Now, some don't like to use maybe the Dow because it only has 30 stocks in it, but it's one you can follow. Then there's what we call the NASDAQ. Now, this is just it's called National Association of Security Dealers Automated Quotations. Okay, now long name, but for the most part, a lot of people follow the NASDAQ if they're interested in following technology, because what makes up most of it is technology and internet stocks. Now, there's others such as financial and that, but for predominantly mostly technology. Now, this index has 3,300 stocks in it, okay? And again, mostly tech stocks. It is also a weighted index, very, very similar to the S&P 500. So again, if you're somebody that's, trying to follow all these new stocks with technology, that would probably be a good index to follow. Then there's what we call the Russell 3000, okay? This is just 3,000 stocks in the U.S. If you put all 3,000 in, it probably makes up 98% of the whole stock market. So if you're one just want to follow the whole market itself, that might be one you might want to follow. Then there's what they call the Russell 2000 index, okay? That's just basically the bottom 2/3 of that Russell 3000. Okay, so you take the 3,000 stocks, take the bottom 2,000, and that's your Russell 2000. Now, mostly what's in the Russell 2000 is your small company stocks. So if you're somebody that's got a portfolio made up mostly of small company stocks, that would be the index you want to follow. And then just remember, you can get ETFs that own those indexes, okay? One for large company stocks, S&P 500 would be SPY, SPY is the ticker symbol. Or if you're trying to follow, like, let's say the NASDAQ, it would be QQQ is the ticker for that. So hopefully you found this valuable. People, follow these indexes, are trying to figure out what the market's doing, and I thought it'd be helpful to know, what makes up them.
Professional golfers have a game plan. Knowing where to attack the golf course is vital, and avoiding the hazards is key. As you can see, we aren't professional golfers. But at Northern Michigan's Centennial Wealth Advisory, we are professional financial advisors. And just like a good golfer, we have a game plan, a holistic approach for your financial future, using income planning, tax planning, estate planning, wealth management, and healthcare planning to help you plan to retire well. We have lived in Northern Michigan all our lives, and we have offices in Traverse City, Gaylord, Petoskey, and Cadillac. Give Centennial Wealth Advisory a call or visit us at cen-wealth.com and let us help you plan to retire well.
In this segment, I want to talk to you about maybe having too much emotions with the stocks that you own. I think of the story of my wife's grandma. She inherited this stock from her parents. It was Dow stock, and it was all in one stock. It was all in Dow. And she wanted to pass that on to her kids. So what she did, though, is she kept it all in Dow stock. She felt like that because she received it as Dow stock, that's what she wanted to pass on. Now, I had to explain to her that, we might want to challenge that thinking because being all in one stock, if that stock went down in value, that account was going to go down in value as well. She had no diversification. So even though she had this emotional attachment to it because it was given to her and she wanted to pass it on, it wasn't necessarily the best thing for her to just hold on to it. I think of that a GE literally was a rocket scientist for GE, and GE had always done him well. He'd worked for him for years. He'd actually retired from GE, and he owned all this GE stock. Now, GE at one time would be a tremendous company to have ownership in. Of recent years, not so much. But I had a heck of a trying to talk him out of getting out of his GE stock because he had such an emotional attachment to it. Now, did it do well for some time after that? Absolutely. It was a good thing for him. But had he held on to that, again, in recent years, would not have been a good thing for him. I think that individual, when .com was such a big thing, this in the late 90s, remember, right before that recession we had between 2000 and 2002, and he was hearing about all these .com companies. He got a hot tip on a couple of them that were doing very, very well, but they had no earnings. And I was trying to explain to him, listen, this is not stocks you want to own when they don't have any earnings. And he wanted at one point to put everything in them. I talked him into only doing about 10%. Well, sure enough, what happened? Earnings did matter. That those stocks lost all their value in that recession, and he was so happy that he didn't throw all his eggs in that basket. Folks, earnings do matter. The market trades as a general rule at a multiple of its earnings. Historically, it's traded at about 17 times earnings. So when we see that multiple get a little bit higher, let's say it gets up there around 25, we can sustain that for a little while. And some people will jump ahead and do that because they see the earnings doing well in the future. So you can stand that. But folks, it's not going to be sustainable for long periods of time. Diversification is still the answer. You want to, again, don't want to have all your eggs in one basket. Don't get yourself caught emotionally holding stocks that you shouldn't hold. If you're somebody that has that concern and you want to see what proper diversification looks like for you, then certainly give us a call. We'd be glad to help.
I'm really glad, Larry, that you're diving into those indices or different indexes. So often people come in and they say, well, oh, my portfolio's doing really well, or it's not doing so well. And I think that a lot of times people are simply looking at what the Dow is doing, which is just 30 stocks, or the S&P 500. But a lot of times their portfolio is much further diversified beyond that. So you have to factor in what investments do you have maybe in different international stocks, or what about some of those small company stocks that would fit better into the Russell 2000, or as most of you may have, what different bonds might you have in the portfolio? So you have to be considering, what weighting you might have of equities versus fixed income in the portfolio, and what a big difference that can make, Larry, when you're looking at the different returns and what it might be doing.
Yeah, John, I'm glad you just brought up international stocks. I didn't even talk about the index that might just follow international stocks. So if I'm going to look at my portfolio and I got a mix of bonds, I've got a mix of international, maybe small cap, mid cap, S&P 500 is not going to be a good benchmark to follow. But maybe having a few of those benchmarks that you can kind of look at how my portfolio might act would be appropriate. And then John was talking about emotional attachment to stocks. I've seen this before, what I didn't talk about is that person who maybe has that stock that's done super well for them for years, right? Maybe they've had Apple forever, right? Mm-hmm. And they just don't know how to get rid of it or learn how to diversify it, right?
Yeah, so true. And that's sometimes the case where maybe you've held that stock for so long and you get emotionally attached, or maybe you worked for that company for a period of years and you just think you you know that company, well, that's where the stock may not react the same way, and potentially maybe you inherited that stock from a loved one. And so that's where you may want to consider realizing the gains, at least as it stands right now, where you wouldn't have tax implications to sell that, but then maybe look at diversifying further, but you could still hold that same stock. So if you've gotten anything out of this and want to talk further, you're welcome to give us a call. We'd love to sit down and talk with you, but stay tuned as we're going to be diving into surviving spouse taxation and expense ratios coming up next.
When does a Roth IRA conversion strategy make sense? Check out our free instant download of the Wealth Report at cen-wealth.com regarding Roth IRA conversions to help you plan to retire well. Find out what the Roth IRA conversion rules are and what scenarios are beneficial from a tax perspective. To receive this instant download, simply visit cen-wealth.com, scroll down, and click Download Now to receive your copy of the Wealth Report. Simply visit cen-wealth.com.
If you are retired or soon to be retired, let us help you plan to retire well. Centennial Wealth Advisory specializes in retirement planning and has offices in Traverse City, Cadillac, Petoskey, and Gaylord. We'll never pressure anyone to become a client. Our goal is to inform and educate. Simply attend one of our live events or schedule a meeting at one of our Northern Michigan office locations for a free, no obligation retirement review.
Hi, welcome to Chalk Talk. Listen, what I want to talk to you about in this segment is surviving spouse taxation and why it's so important to understand. So here's a couple. They're getting $45,000 in Social Security. Now just don't know this, one's getting 30, the other's getting 15. Now they want $81,000 of income. So they're just going to take $36,000 out of their IRA to make up the difference. Now Uncle Sam says in this particular case, $18,000 of that Social Security is going to be taxable income. Now they get a standard deduction for $26,000. Okay, their taxable income is $28,000. Income tax, $2,992. All right, now one of them passes away. Now, if you didn't know this with Social Security, the surviving spouse gets to keep the higher of the two Social Securities. So he or she gets to keep 30, but they lose 15 in Social Security. Now, he or she still wants the same income of $81,000. So now all they're going to do is take an additional $15,000 out of the IRAs to make up the difference. Now, Uncle Sam says in this particular situation now, okay, look at this, $30,000 in Social Security, but now $26,000 of it is taxable income. Look at the difference. Over here, $45,000 in Social Security, only $18,000 of it was taxable income. All right, so they get a standard deduction that's half the amount they had before because they're single now. Okay, taxable income, $63,000. Income tax, $9,890. Now folks, understanding this is very important. Why? Look at the difference here. A difference of almost $7,000, and all he or she did is take an additional $15,000 out of the IRAs to make up for the lost income they lost from Social Security. How can this be? So understanding what that taxation is going to be to the surviving spouse is just as important as it is when you're both together in your married years living. Maybe we could have employed some IRA exit strategies like being more aggressive with the Roth conversions. So by the time that person died and there was a surviving spouse, none of the Social Security ended up being taxable. Maybe we could get them into a situation where they had zero tax at all. Again, no cost, no obligation to come in and let us see if you're a Roth conversion candidate, maybe show you what your situation looks like. Give us a call.
During a market downturn, people tend to panic. That's a natural reaction to seeing your retirement savings decline right in front of your eyes. Take a deep breath. We can help. We recommend the following 3 steps. Number 1, schedule a risk exposure review and make adjustments if necessary. Number 2, request a retirement income analysis to serve as the starting point for your retirement strategy, making sure your money lasts as long as you do. And number 3, develop a holistic financial plan. Call or click to request a free, no obligation meeting, either in person or over the phone or video chat. We look forward to meeting you. Plan to retire well.
What are these expense ratios you find in mutual funds? An expense ratio is simply the general and administrative costs associated in running that mutual fund. It's their research costs. If they're running a fund and they've got an objective, then you want them doing the research as they study the companies and securities that they're putting in that mutual fund, right? It's their advertising costs. Folks, these costs are generally published in the prospectus that they have to give you. That's that little booklet that's got all the details about that mutual fund. You know, what is its objective? You know, what kind of securities is it holding? What's their strategy, right? And in there is going to be this expense ratio that they're going to tell you what those costs are. Now, in 2013, Morningstar did a study and they found that of all the mutual funds, they pretty much averaged about 1.25%. Now you're going to find sometimes mutual funds with much lower costs, especially if there's not a lot of trading associated with it, and you might find some that are higher, but they found the average to be about 1.25%. Now Barron's did a study in 2013 as well, and they found out of 1,800 mutual funds that they found this study did, they found that where the average expense ratio was 1.19%, the corresponding hidden costs were 1.44%. So, you ask, what are these hidden costs? Well, they're going to be the transaction costs associated with the buying and selling of the securities within the portfolio. You got to understand, when they go out and buy a security, there might be fees and commissions associated with that buy. And the same thing on the sell side. Well, those costs aren't going to be disclosed separately. They're just going to get attached to the securities they're buying and selling. So, just knowing that those costs are there is something you're going to want to know. Now, how do I know how high those costs are? Well, you're not going to know. But one clue might be if you look at the turnover ratio with that mutual fund, meaning how much buying and selling they're going to do. Well, there's reason to believe that one that's turning over much more is probably going to have higher transaction costs than one that's not turning over a lot. So, folks, we can get behind these mutual funds and we can tell you, what the average expense ratio you're paying is in your mix of mutual funds. And we can tell you what those turnover ratios are within those funds. Isn't that important for you to know? Now, other things we can look at is cross-intersection. When you got mutual funds all owning maybe the same security, when you put those mutual funds together, what securities am I owning? Is there any low concentration of stocks in any one area? So, folks, if that's something you want to know, if that's something you want to understand, then give us a call because we can do that for you.
Surviving spouse taxation, I know it's something that not everybody wants to talk about what that looks like when a loved one passes away, but how important it really is to be trying to plan ahead as best you can, and taxes are a big piece of that. As I've been having a lot of meetings lately, and taxes have come up as part of the conversation, and I haven't heard anybody say yet that they think taxes are going down. It's quite the opposite. Yeah. So as you're looking at that and you're looking at a long-term plan, you have to factor in, we call it your IRA exit strategy. So if you have money in 401k, 403b, 457 traditional IRAs that hasn't been taxed yet, you need to start looking at what are some of those options that you might want to be considering as far as moving that money from a taxable IRA maybe over to a tax-free Roth IRA, and what advantages those might have, Larry, as you look at a long-term plan.
Yeah, John, I'm glad you brought that up because I haven't run into anybody either that thinks taxes are going to go down, right? With this pandemic, I mean, the reality is that, we all know that that's got to get paid back. Taxes are going to go up. So now is the time to get aggressive on, having some kind of an IRA exit strategy, getting Uncle Sam out of those accounts and buying them out as cheaply as possible. And it doesn't have to be all or nothing. People don't realize we can do partial Roth conversions. If you've got some room in that lower bracket, we want to be taking advantage of that each and every year. I don't care if it's $10,000, $15,000. That's at least moving in the right direction, right? And then when we are talking about those expense ratios, you know, mutual funds have fees, and we just thought it might be helpful for you to understand, you know, how those fees might, you know, hit you if you have those mutual funds. Most of those expense ratios you can find right in the prospectus. They'll tell you about. There's other costs they might not talk about, you know, trading fees and things like that, but at least it's helpful to know. Folks, you have the ability to, you know, we have the ability to get behind any portfolio and tell you exactly what you're paying in fees. Don't you want to know? I encourage you, if you want to take advantage of that, at least understand where you're paying fees in, then give us a call.
Hi, my name is Jack Clunner, and I'm a financial advisor with Centennial Wealth Advisory. My wife and I moved up here 13 years ago, and we have really enjoyed raising our 4 children in the beautiful northern Michigan country that we have. If you've been watching the show for a while, you know what we specialize in. If you are at retirement or near retirement, give us a call. Call the number on your screen. We can help go through all the different aspects of planning that are involved in retiring well. So I look forward to hearing from you.
All right, in this segment, I want to talk about the Federal Reserve. Now, you hear about them in the news a lot. It seems like, you know, when they're lowering interest rates, the markets are going up, and when they're raising interest rates, the market's going down. Why are they responding so sensitively to what the Federal Reserve does? Well, there's a lot the Federal Reserve is responsible for. Now, they were created in 1913. Now, there was a lot of discussion at that time whether they should be a private organization or a government organization. And there was a lot of controversy on Congress which way this should go. In the end, they ended up compromising. The board of the Federal Reserve is made up of government appointees and also CEOs of private large central banks. So it's a little bit of private and government in the mix. Now, what is their objective? What is their goals? First of all, they have a dual mandate. They want to, one, keep currency stable, you know, make sure our currency is stable in the country, but they got a dual mandate in the sense that they want to control inflation and have low unemployment. Now, these two things are kind of opposed to each other because typically when you've had very low unemployment, inflation will go up because people's wages grow and there's higher demand than there is supply and prices go up, and they don't want inflation to get out of whack. Now, they like to see inflation be about 2%. Now, we've actually had that for quite some time. So how do they do this? Well, they control the money supply by buying treasuries, okay? If they go out and buy treasuries, they're basically increasing the money supply because they're putting money into the economy. But they can contract that money supply by selling securities, okay? So that's how they kind of do it. The other way they control the economy or the money supply is in the interest rates they charge. They become the bank to the banks. So when the banks need money, they borrow it from the Federal Reserve. Well, the Federal Reserve will loan it out to them at a certain interest rate. All right, that kind of becomes the baseline. So if the Federal Reserve is wanting to lower interest rates to fuel the economy a little bit better, then they're going to lower that federal rate in which they loan to the banks, which allows them to loan it out to everybody else at a lower rate. Okay, but here's all that being said, and trying to control the money supply, the biggest goal or objective for the Federal Reserve is to make sure there's no run on the banks. Okay, if you've ever seen that movie, it usually comes out at Christmas time, called It's a Wonderful Life, with George Bailey, maybe played by, you know, James Stewart. Remember what happened? All the people came to the credit union and they wanted their money right now. And James Stewart or George Bailey had to tell them, listen, your money's loaned out with this person, it's loaned out with that person. I can give you some of it now, but not all of it. That's what the Federal Reserve does to all the major central banks, so that there can't be a run on the banks and have it be detrimental to our economy. So hopefully it just gives you some tidbits about the Federal Reserve, maybe helps you understand a little bit about their role, which happens to be quite huge. Well, anyway, I hope you found that interesting. Hey, if you want to talk a little bit more about the Federal Reserve and maybe the impact it might have on your portfolio, then certainly give us a call.
Really appreciate you, Larry, diving into the Federal Reserve, and the hot button topic right now is inflation. And you hear from people that are knowing that it's coming down the pike here, but not really sure what that looks like. As I look at the numbers and I look back at 100+ year history, and we see over 3%. We look at more recently, 10-year average I think was about 1.7%. And so we have to assume, I guess at this point, Larry, that inflation is going to be going up. And to what level do we think that might be?
Yeah, well, right now, John, it's settling around 3-4%. And you know, I talked about this dual mandate that the Fed has. They like to keep it around 2%. But they've come out and they said, we're okay having a little higher inflation. And you might wonder, well, why now? Do you want to change that? They think that inflation has been so low for so long that we can afford to run it a little high for a while, right? Now, how do you get inflation? It's simply when you have all this demand. Now, you know, following this pandemic, you know, with people getting vaccinated, you know, people have done real well with their households, you know, through this pandemic. They've saved, they've paid off debt. Now things are freeing up and they want to travel, they want to spend, and that's great. But when you get all this demand and then, you know, not a lot of supply right now because we've gone through a pandemic, supply chains have been totally disrupted. So now you get inflation. So two things can happen here. The supply lines are going to catch up with the demand, okay, and this will taper off, which is what I think the Feds are hoping for, or this thing just runs rampant and it takes us places we don't want to go. Now, why is inflation bad? Well, folks, here's the deal. You know, for people that have a lot, inflation doesn't hurt them. If their groceries go up, gas goes up, that doesn't change their life. But for people that are going paycheck to paycheck, that drastically affects them. And if they don't have money to spend on other things, well, that affects everything because 70% of our GDP is consumer spending, right? So if that segment's not spending, that will affect the economy, that'll affect earnings, that'll affect the market. So whether we believe inflation will hurt us individually, overall, it can economically possibly take us into a recession.
So true. And if that's something that, have you mapped out the next 30, 40 years of your retirement planning? That's something that we specialize in helping you plan to retire well. So thanks again for tuning in. If you have questions, you're always welcome to give us a call. We'd love the opportunity to sit down with you for a no cost, no obligation visit. Thanks again.